In this two-part series, we will be looking at the DISC behavioral profile. And at this time, you should have already taken your assessment, and you should be able to look at your report and see those scores. There are 4 categories that we'll be walking through. The first is dominance, and then there's the influencer, and then steadiness and compliance, and this makes up the D, I, S, and C. We're going to go through some definitions of each of these. So the D category basically describes how you respond to problems and challenges, and your score from 0 to 100 will determine how you react to different kinds of problems and challenges. We then have the I, the influence category, and this is how you influence others to your point of view. And then we have the S category, which is steadiness, how you respond to the pace of your environment. And then C for compliance, and this is how you respond to rules that are set by others. So now we're going to go through all 4 of these categories one by one and just kind of look at some definitions of what it looks like to be high or low in this category. So we're going to start off with D for dominance, and here you can see some examples of people that have a high D score. So these words on the screen are specifically describing you if you are like a 60 or above, if your score is 60 or above in the D category. So adventuresome, challenging, competitive, decisive, persistent, problem solver. And so there's some really great examples here of people out in the world or fictional characters that really exhibit that high D quality. So some things that make them tick. So the dominant emotion for the high D, now not the low D, this is primarily the high D, is anger. So their first reaction might be anger. Their motivation is getting results. So they're focused on the ROI, getting things done. And they also have a need for control. So as you're working with a high D, it's really important to be aware of these characteristics. So let's take a look. How do we recognize a high D? So that you can know if you're working with one or having to communicate with one, what the best way might be to have that conversation. So a high D is typically extroverted, and they're also task-oriented. And what that means is that they probably get energy from tasks, so checking things off their list. Their body language, they might be leaning forward, they might walk fast, they might have a lot of gestures, and they're really good at keeping eye contact. Under stress, they might become really impatient because they're pretty fast-oriented. And one clue is that they don't want your opinions, they really just want the facts, and they want to get those results done. So those are a few ways to recognize whether or not you're dealing with a high D. So if you are dealing with a high D, here's what they would want to see from you when you're having a conversation. So, like we said, they want to see results. They like ROI, return on investment. They want to be taken seriously, and you need to take them seriously. And for a lot of high Ds, it isn't even a personal thing. They're just focused on getting things done. They also really appreciate the power to be able to choose. They would rather have some control than being told what to do. And we mentioned the fast pace, so they like things to be quick and move from one thing to the next. And they appreciate that business approach. So those are some things just to keep in the back of your mind as you're thinking about communicating with someone who's a high D. So at this point, you're probably thinking of someone you know in your life who's a high D and how sometimes maybe you even rub them the wrong way. And so here's just kind of some tips on what to focus on to make sure you're moving in a positive direction, at least for them. Now, things that don't work for a high D. So frequent stops, that's that impatient thing. A lot of phrases that start with, in my opinion, so that's the opposite of facts. If you are presenting a lot of opinions that don't have proof behind them, that can be frustrating. And if you're asking them to follow your directions, once again, they like to have that control and the need to choose. So following directions of other people can be hard for them. And if you ask them to relax, that can also be very difficult for a high D. So there are some things that you might want to try and avoid, or at least just be aware of as you're having conversations. Now let's take a look at both the high and the low. We've mostly talked about the high aspects of the D category. So here's some extra words. So ambitious, forceful, decisive, independent, goal-oriented, all of those. Now if you're on the low D scale, the 0 to 40, you kind of have some opposite words going on. So we have mild, agreeable, modest, peaceful. They're probably trying to make sure everyone in the room is getting the opinion of everyone before making a decision. The low D is more peaceful and unobtrusive. Now, there's two questions you can ask yourself to try and determine whether or not someone's a high or a low D, or really in any of these categories you'll see this come up. So, high Ds are task-oriented, and they are also fast-paced. So there's two questions you can ask. Are they task-paced or people-oriented? Or are they fast-paced or slower or more deliberate? So the low Ds have more sense of people, and they are more deliberate, or they're a little bit slower paced. They like to take their time and really make sure that they get things right the first time. So that's kind of the difference between the high D and the low D. So now let's go ahead and move into the I. So here's some descriptors of the high I. Once again, we're going to start with the high, and then we'll talk about the low in a minute. So those that are a high I, they love to be around lots of people. They're enthusiastic. They love to go to parties. They love to talk to everyone in the room. They tend to be popular. They also really like to talk and be heard. And they're a lot of fun, typically, to be around if you're a high I. So here's some things that make them tick. Their primary emotion is trust and optimism. So if you're running into a person who just always has that optimistic attitude, that's a big clue that they might be a high I. Their motivation is relationships. They love people. They love being around lots of people. And their need is to be heard. So there's that talking category. They just love to communicate and be around people. So those are the primary things behind the high I. So, how to recognize a high I. They are also extroverted, just like the high D, but unlike the high D, they're people-oriented. So the high D was task-oriented, and the high I is people-oriented. Their body language could be casual. They might be distracted when walking because they're taking everything in. Big sweeping gestures and facial expressions, they're also really good at eye contact. Under stress, they can seem really disorganized because they don't care as much about the details. And one clue might be that they talk with their hands. So there's just some basic things to look for if you're trying to recognize a high I. So, what does a high I want from you? If you're having a conversation, you recognize that this person is a high I. They love perks, any and all. They like support of their ideas and their charities, the things that they're working on for you to buy into what they're doing. They really appreciate if you let them know that you care and that you're listening to them. They love that personal relationship with you, and they love meeting new people. And they love to feel important. They want to be your favorite person. So those are just some things with a high I. Now, things that don't work for them. So if you're working with a high I, these are some things to maybe avoid. The theoretical world, they don't really want to work in. They don't want it to be the same for everyone. They like to be the favorite. If you're giving them a lot of tasks that are detail-oriented or require a lot of study, that can be really frustrating for a high I. Typically, high I's are very good at being salespeople because they love interacting and they like that competitive nature of sales. So a lot of people that have that high I are very, very good in dealing with people and in that sales category. So then let's go ahead and take a look at the high I and the low I. So the high I is magnetic, friendly, demonstrative. We see a lot of people in the political arena that are high I's. Conversely, on the low side, if you're a low I, that's 0 to 40 on that score, you're typically more matter-of-fact, more pessimistic. You're looking for what might be wrong in the situation. You might be more critical and moody. And once again, let me preface this, that none of these are necessarily good or bad. These are words that just describe, and how we use them as people makes them typically good or bad. So sometimes when you take any of these too far, it can be rough. But these are just describing how this person would typically respond. So if we look at the high I's again there at the top, the high I's are people-oriented, and they're also fast-paced. So they love being around a lot of people, and they love to move quickly. The low I's, on the other hand, tend to get their energy from tasks, so they're more task-oriented, and the low I's are also more deliberate. So, at this point, I'm going to end this video. In the next video, we'll talk about the S and the C, and then we'll relate all of these different 4 categories together a little bit more.